My parents started building a new home right after they both retired. They were pretty hands-on with the construction at first, but it ended up taking much longer than they'd expected. By the summer, the house was only 3/4 finished. My parents had already booked a non-refundable cruise for most of July, so they asked me to check on the house while they were gone. On the first 2 days of their cruise, I just drove by the house. The construction people seemed hard at work, so I didn't bother getting out of my car. On the third day, I decided to take a closer look. I parked on the street and walked over to one of the construction workers. He was painting the shutters. I introduced myself as the son of his clients. He shook my hand, but he didn't seem too happy to meet me. I asked if I could take a quick look around. "Go wherever you want," he grumbled, "but stay out of the basement. That's unfinished." I gave him my word, but of course I was going to go into the basement. I'd promised my parents that I'd make sure the construction was continuing, so I needed to see every room. I didn't go there first, of course. The construction guy would have stopped me. So I started by walking around the house. Aside from some painting, the exterior seemed ready. Then I walked through the living room and kitchen. Everything looked good. I made sure that I was alone, and then I walked down into the unfinished basement. It was too dark to see at first. I clicked on the light, and I immediately gasped at what I saw. There were chains everywhere, a swing hanging from the ceiling, a circular bed on a rotating platform, shelves filled with all kinds of weird toys. There was even a life-sized, extremely realistic-looking doll lying face down on a bench. Oh, my parents were building a dungeon. There was no other explanation. Oh, no wonder the construction worker didn't want me to come down there. I very quickly rushed out of there, feeling really grossed out. As I hurried back to my car, the construction worker stopped me. "You went into the basement, didn't you?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Nope, I didn't see anything." The man looked at me for a long time, trying to figure out if he believed me. I guess he did, because he eventually turned around and went back to work. He didn't say anything else. I was about to drive home, vowing to never mention what I saw, when my phone rang. It was my parents checking in on the new house. I told them not to worry, everything looked fine. Unfortunately, my mom knew me better than anyone. She could tell that I was hiding something. All it took was one question before I blurted out, "I saw your dungeon!" My parents were silent for a long moment. Then Dad awkwardly asked, "Was it finished yet?" "Yes," I said. "All your stuff was there." "Including the swing?" Mom asked hopefully. "Yes, the swing, all the shelves, even your life-size doll." Silence again. And then Mom said, "Honey, we don't have any dolls." I couldn't believe I was having this conversation with my own parents. They didn't seem ashamed of their dungeon, but it was still really awkward. I wanted to change the subject, but Dad kept pushing me to describe the doll. So I did. It was male, with a very muscular build and sandy blonde hair. That's all I could see from across the basement. "Oh my God," Mom said. "Janie, you just described Gus, our lead contractor." I told her that I just talked to their lead contractor. In fact, I could see him outside my car window. He was still painting the shutters, occasionally glancing at me, and he looked nothing like the body I'd seen in the basement. I described him to my parents, and they said that they had no idea who that was. Mom urged me to call the police, but I figured this was all some misunderstanding. With my parents still on the phone, I got out of my car to approach the worker. "Hey, excuse me, I'm on the phone with my parents right now." The man froze in place. The paintbrush slipped out of his hand. "What's your name?" I asked him. "I'm Gus," he said. My mom's voice screamed through the phone, "That's not Gus's voice! Janie, get out of there!" Unfortunately, her voice was so loud that even though I wasn't on speakerphone, the man heard her too. He knew he'd been busted. Immediately, he dove at me and grabbed the phone out of my hand. Then, he chucked it against the wall, shattering it into pieces. He tried to grab my wrist, but I pushed him backwards and ran into the house. I locked the door behind me, but I knew that he'd find another way to get in. I had to find somewhere to hide. Once again, I ran down into the basement and locked the door behind me. Then, I positioned myself behind the swing and waited for him to try to come in. Gus's body was still lying face down behind me. Flies buzzed around it. I felt like such an idiot for thinking that it was a doll. Suddenly, I heard the man fumble with the doorknob. Then I heard his keys jingle. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. He slowly descended the stairs. "I told you not to come down here." He had a plank of wood in one hand. Just as he reached the bottom of the stairs, I pushed the swing as hard as I could. The metal chain slammed against him, knocking him backwards onto the steps. He was hurt, but not enough to stop him. I ran forward, jumped over him, and climbed the basement stairs. He'd stupidly left his keys in the door, so I locked him inside. Then I walked across the street and called the police. They arrested the man and collected the body. He's in custody now, but he still won't tell anyone who he is, or why he murdered poor Gus. My parents are supposed to come back tomorrow. I hope we'll all get some answers soon. At the very least, their house is now completely finished. They can use their gross little basement as much as they want.
Success as a salesman comes at a cost. Everybody who has sold anything in life and made a career for themselves out of selling knows that at the soul of the business, when all is said and done, there would be a fundamentally changed person in you than what you had started out with. For some people, it is the process that changes them. For others like me, it is a singular event. And my event came on a cold day in December 1984. I remember the rush I had felt that day. True success is a drug so many people never earn in their lives. Maybe athletes at the tail end of the game, with the crowd roaring their names, would feel something so rare repeatedly. It was good. The walls of the hotel I was at had a vibrant liveliness to them when I sang in the bathroom. It was as though I was singing to an audience of millions of people. I was that excited. I hadn't had any sleep in about 48 hours since I had gotten the news of my nomination, and the words still rang in my ears. Salesman of the Year. It was hard to believe. There I was, alive at that moment. My flight to Michigan had been 60 minutes long, but it felt longer. My body ached from the 8-hour trip I had taken the previous day to drop off my daughter at my parents', who lived in a different city. I managed myself out of the bathroom when I was sufficiently washed. Salesman of the Year. I mouthed to myself as I lazed on the cozy sheets. I tried to imagine the fun fare, but nothing in my mind could conjure the comparing of the feeling of utter bliss that was running through me. As an intern salesman almost a decade ago, I had such dreams of such days, and I had read all the papers of the awards of Albert Richardson Hall and how the career of each of the winners had grown to become iconic. Callum, my boss at the car dealership, would be present. He sent messages of how proud he was of me. I was doing good work at one of the leading companies in the country, and it was no easy feat. I tried to imagine the faces they would wear when I win. It was not until late into the night that I was able to get some sleep in preparation for what would be the biggest day in my career. A brash, mindless jabbing on the door woke me up from the depths of my slumber way before dawn. The noise of hands beating on the door was so loud it seeped into my dream and seemingly pulled me out. My head banged from the forceful awakening, and I jerked upright on my bed. "Who the hell was that?" I shouted at the door. Then there was no noise. It was quiet, and I was simmering with rage. I waited for an answer, but when there was none, still, I pushed myself out of bed and walked straight to the door. I had a sense that something was awry. The lack of tension intimidated me of safety within the room, but the off chance that someone was trying to save me from a disaster pushed me back to the locks. The door yawned as I pulled it back and waited for the stranger to speak. He was dressed in a long brown coat. His shirt was pristine white, and they glowed under the reflection of the light overhead. From his chest pocket to his hip, a golden chain accentuated a slender frame. His skin was ashen and his eyes were sunken. The bags under each eye had a black hue of swelling. He had a dark presence that was not easily perceivable, but unraveled when he lingered. I sensed something menacing was about to happen, but I didn't know for sure, so I was careful not to startle myself needlessly, even though I had started to panic. "Mark Thorpe?" he inquired, one brow jumping over the other to register a feature. I straightened my body and cleared my throat and said that it was indeed me. He sighed, and I saw a smile drift past his face. It was gone before I registered what I was seeing. He dipped his hand into the side as one would do to fetch something, but what came out changed both of our lives. A knife. It was puzzling at first. It crippled my senses, and I simply stood there, watching it happen. He retrieved the knife without missing a beat, swiftly stabbing at me. My mind processed the pain slowly, but it hurt whenever he cut me. His knife dipped into me. I was bleeding from every part of my body before realizing that I had been shoved back into the room. I saw Death's gaze into mine, and I cowered. My bowels turned loose, and I let it rip. My body burned from the inside as I watched myself fade into oblivion, wondering what I had done to deserve such a cruel and unexpected end. "Your kind took her away from me, Mark. All we did was trust you," he said in a tone so strong. "She died in a crash 3 years ago because of one of the cars you sold her, telling her it was in good condition when it wasn't. I tried to protest, wondering why I had to be killed for a matter that was no business of mine. He lost his wife to a bad salesman, and it turned him into a serial killer. He explained to me, each line of his explanation more potent as the last. The deception that led to the accident had scarred him deeply because his wife had been pregnant with their child. You know how many car salesmen I had to kill to atone for her death?" he asked and answered before I could speak. 23. And they all begged like pathetic wretches. I couldn't beg. I couldn't speak. The blood from my gut clogged my mouth, but I saw him pull out a gun. I was surely dead. But in a surprising move, he turned the gun on his own head and fired. Then it all went black, as if my most terrifying moments ended. When my eyes opened, I half expected to be in some afterlife dimension. But my family was by my side, assuring me that I had survived the deranged killer, and the gunshot had alerted the hotel staff, and they called the police. I survived the ordeal, but I knew I could not continue at that job, for a fear of maybe another killer might find me, and I would not survive their attacks.
"Jane!" she said with an enthusiastic laughter, and all of a sudden, her countenance changed. A frown stole its way from her forehead down to her cheeks, pulling her lips into a droop. "You don't remember me?" I was not smiling. I did not remember her, just as I did not remember most people I had gone to high school with nearly 2 decades ago. It was such a long time since then, and so much more had happened. I struggled to not betray my confusion, but seeing her mule in dejection broke my heart. Jane did not appear to hold it against me, but I also felt like an asshole, robbing her of the moment to reconnect with someone she knew at the high school reunion. I took one breath in and threw caution to the wind. "Oh, Jane!" I blurted, pretending to be just as enthused to meet her as I was to reconnect again. It's been ages! I watched her face go from blushing red to a flushing pale as relief washed through her. It felt good to see the smile on her face return. Reconnecting was harmless, I reasoned. I was always so inconsequential in class, and you were always the IT girl. I know, it's hard to remember me when you have the entire world pining for your attention. It's been ages, Becky, Jane moaned. She promised to keep in touch with me and immediately asked which was my preferred mode of reconnecting. I said I was on Facebook. Jane sent a request in front of me, and I accepted her request. The night was not over before I received her first message. I thought it was strange, but to break her cute heart was something I could not offer to do, so I obliged her and replied. I received no less than 1,000 messages from Jane over the course of a month, ranging from personal requests like my marriage and how the kids were to where I lived. I told her I was unmarried. In a flimsy manner, which I would later regret, I also gave her my address, unsure that she would ever come that far, as we lived at least 5 states away from each other. Jane told me she was married and she now had 3 kids. I told her I was happy for her accomplishments. She asked if I didn't want kids of my own or a marriage of my own. I told her I did not because I was yet to find a partner that met my desires to be married. I could feel the conversation steer into the territory that made me uncomfortable, so I asked Jane to discontinue talking about it as it made no difference to the quality of the lives that we led. I was happy. Well, the messages grew even more personal when Jane hinted that she could not believe she would have something that I did not have, a family. It was at this point in the 2nd month that I considered all of our exchanges weird. I neither envied her good fortune in marriage nor desired her motherhood. I decided that I was going to block Jane on a very fine Tuesday morning, as she was starting to creep me out with her incessant messages going on about the same things. Well, by the next day, which was a Wednesday, I felt a huge burden lifted off of my shoulder when I did not receive messages from Jane. It felt strangely relieving to have gotten rid of her through that block, and I wanted nothing more than for it to stay that way forever. But the forever that I desired lasted less than a week. I heard my doorbell ring on Saturday evening of the next week, and it was so strange that there was a familiar but strange person at my door. She smiled when she saw me open the door, and from quick assessment I could see that she came dressed in a black shirt, spandex pants, and a pair of sneakers. She wore a black baseball hat, which made her features difficult for me to recognize at first. But then she smiled, and it dawned on me that it was Jane. "You blocked me on Facebook. Why?" Her smile, which had been cute at the reunion, was now creepy. I choked on the ball of saliva in my throat. "Why are you showing up at my house?" I retorted, puzzled by the weirdness of it all. "How did you even get my address?" "You gave me your address, silly," Jane hinted, and I sensed danger immediately from her menacing grin. My life flashed before my eyes. It made me sick that I had been so foolish to have been manipulated into trusting Jane. I was still in deep thoughts of regret when Jane, without warning, lashed out at me. She lunged through the door and tackled me to the floor before I could register what was happening. She grabbed my hair and placed a knife on my throat with the stern warning for me to remain still. The coldness of the blade against my flesh was enough to heed her warning. I blurted and cried and apologized in an incoherent, drawn-out babble. There was no way I could quantify the horror that I felt in that moment, realizing that my life was in her hands. I hoped, for my own sake, that she was not angry enough to kill me because I had blocked her messages on Facebook. "I'm so sorry," I managed to say as tears streamed down my face. I was hot from fear, and my body was shaken to numbness. "What are you sorry for?" she said to me as she yanked my hair, allowing me to pick myself off the floor slowly without relieving the knife from my throat. I didn't know what I was sorry for. so I mumbled whatever word that came to my mind. She sighed and scraped the knife up from my neck to my face. Then she turned the sharp edge, cutting into my skin as I bawled in horror. I clutched the injury instinctively and fell back to the floor with blood in my hands. "Not so perfect anymore, huh, Becky?" Jane taunted me as I lay on the floor crying. "Now you have a mark on your face that will always remind you that life shouldn't be as perfect as you have it." "Why?" I could only manage, feeling pangs of panic and terror. "Because I hated you, Becky," she confessed. "I hated you when we were in high school because you had everything I wanted and could never have. And now you go to Ibiza on vacation, live in a fancy home, and you have nothing to worry about. And you don't even notice that I want everything that you have." "Oh," I sobbed when it finally struck me. "Goodbye, Becky. Enjoy your life with a scar on your face," Jane said before she left me in a pool of my own blood from my bleeding face. It was not the last time I saw her. Jane was arrested for what she did to me, and she went to jail for it. But my life, with the gash on my face, had fundamentally changed forever.
My boyfriend Robert booked us a really nice Airbnb for our anniversary. It was a ranch house just outside Palm Springs, and it was gorgeous. I'm not the biggest fan of desert environments, but I'm much more of a beach person myself. Robert seemed adamant that this would be the perfect spot, and I wasn't going to argue. The house itself wasn't that big, but the property was enormous. It even had a barn in the back, plus a winding nature trail that wrapped around most of the property. It was the kind of place that people would rent out for weddings or other big events. I didn't know how Robert could afford it. A woman named Nadia helped us out. Her family owned the property. I got a good feeling about her first. She seemed pretty friendly. She actually looked a lot like me too. The same long brown hair, same body type, and even slightly raspy voice sounding. As she was giving us a tour, I noticed her and Robert were exchanging very conspiratorial-looking glances. I asked them if they knew each other, but Robert assured me that they only communicated through the Airbnb messenger. I really didn't believe them, but I wasn't the suspicious type. I knew that they were hiding something, just didn't know what. Just in case, I asked Robert if I could borrow his phone to look at the Airbnb messages. He got extremely defensive and told me no. I didn't want to get into an argument so soon after we checked in, so I dropped the subject. We settled in and I started to unpack. I was putting away all my clothes in the bedroom closet when I realized that Robert was no longer in the room. I wasn't sure where he'd run off to. I checked the other rooms, but he wasn't there. Then I looked through the living room window and saw him outside with Nadia. They were just off the porch in the middle of a serious conversation, and it looked like they had no idea that I was watching them. I had to find out what they were talking about. I went to the window and hid just below it so I could hear them better. I couldn't make out full sentences, but I heard enough to know that they were planning something tonight in the barn. I almost started to hyperventilate. I knew that my boyfriend would never cheat on me, especially on our anniversary, but it sure seemed like he was. He came back inside pretty quickly after that, but I didn't say anything. We went to bed that night, and I only pretended to sleep. I just waited with my eyes closed. After about an hour, I felt the bed move. Robert was very quietly climbing out of the bed and sneaking toward the front door. I didn't move until I saw the front door close. Then I raced towards the window and stared out of the darkness. I saw Robert walking through the grass. He was heading straight toward the barn. Furious, I slid on my night shoes and went outside too. I could see lights inside the barn. As I got closer, I could hear Robert and Nadia's voices over some soft romantic music. I didn't bother trying to be quiet. I wanted them to hear me. The barn door was halfway open. I could see them together inside the barn, surrounded with hanging Christmas lights. The whole place looked really romantic. I was so angry that Robert was there with someone else on our anniversary. Just as I reached the barn door, Nadia came out. She was smiling, but the smile disappeared when she ran into me. "You were supposed to be asleep," she said nervously. "Are you sleeping with my boyfriend?" I demanded. "Of course not." "Then what are you two doing in there?" She wouldn't answer. I kept demanding to know what was going on, but she wouldn't even look me in the eyes. She just mumbled that she couldn't tell me. Things escalated pretty quickly after that. I shoved her and she fell into the dirt. She jumped up and slammed her elbow into me. It was the craziest fight I'd gotten into in my life, but I'd never felt one like this. I'd never been this angry. This woman was sleeping with my boyfriend, even though she knew it was our anniversary, and now she was biting me instead of apologizing. She just tripped me onto the ground and was about to kick me in the side, but before she could do that, I grabbed her foot and twisted it. She lost her balance and fell. Then there was this horrible crunch. In the fall, her head slammed against a tree stump. Blood fell out of both her eyes, and her tongue flopped out of her mouth. She was dead. Finally, Robert came out of the barn. He saw me and gasped. When he saw Nadia's dead body, he literally couldn't breathe. He started to have a panic attack. "It wasn't my fault," I said. "We were fighting and she fell." Robert looked at Nadia's bloody face. This did not look like an accident. "Why were you fighting?" he asked. "Because I found out that you two were sleeping together." His shock at my answer was enough to pull him out of his panic attack. He said that I misunderstood everything. Then he demanded that I follow him into the barn. I was afraid of what he would do to me after finding his mistress dead, but I didn't have any other choice. I followed him into the barn. The whole place was beautifully decorated. It looked like the barn from a Hallmark movie. Nadia was helping me decorate this place, so it would be perfect for our anniversary tomorrow. For when I do this. He got down on one knee. "You were going to propose?" I screamed. "That was the plan, until you murdered the party planner." The reality of everything finally sank in. There was a dead body at our Airbnb. Even though I didn't mean to murder her, she was still dead. Her corpse was right outside the barn. The poor victim of a misunderstanding. "What are we going to do?" I asked. "It depends on your answer to my proposal," he answered. His face was blank. For a second, I didn't understand what he wanted me to say. I stepped forward and told him, "Yes, Robert, I'd love to marry you. Then I'll gladly help you bury the body and make up an alibi." With the Christmas lights shining all around us, Robert wrapped his arms around me and gave me the best kiss of my life. We could have held each other forever, but we had a body to bury. This whole experience happened 5 years ago. Robert and I have been married ever since, and Nadia's body was never found.
I've always been the kind of person who dives headfirst into things. Call it stubbornness or a desire for independence, but I like to think of it as an adventurous spirit. That's probably why, despite being new to solo travel, I found myself checking into a hostel in a small town that had a reputation for being self-service. No staff after hours. It was cheap, had good reviews, and I was looking forward to the experience. But as soon as I stepped inside, the air felt thick with unease. The fluorescent lights flickered, and the silence was only interrupted by the occasional creak of the old building. I could feel the weight of something being off, but I shrugged it off. It was probably just nerves, first-night jitters, I told myself. As I dragged my suitcase into the dimly lit hallway, I spotted him. A middle-aged man, shirtless, sitting on the couch in the common area. He looked up, his bloodshot eyes locking onto mine. I offered a polite nod, but he just stared back, his gaze too intense, too unsettling. The smell of alcohol wafted towards me, confirming what I had already expected. He was drunk. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but he didn't respond. Instead, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable, so I quickly made my way to the room, hoping to put some distance between us. We were the only two in the room that night. The uneasy feeling from before had morphed into full-blown anxiety, but I convinced myself to stay. I had already paid, and I didn't want to lose money over what was probably nothing more than an overactive imagination. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I could feel his presence, like a dark cloud hanging over me. The next morning, I was relieved to see someone else had checked in, a woman around my age from Sweden. We exchanged brief pleasantries, and I immediately felt a little more at ease. Maybe it was the company. Maybe it was just having someone else around to share the strange vibe of the place. But the man, he was still there, sitting shirtless in the corner, his eyes following us as we talked. He didn't say a word, just watched. It was unnerving, but I tried to brush it off. People are strange sometimes, especially in hostels. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavier. The woman, her name was Anya, had turned in early. I stayed up, working on my laptop, trying to ignore the creeping dread that had settled in my stomach. And then he approached me. At first, I didn't even notice him until he was right beside me, holding his phone out towards me. The screen displayed a poorly translated note in English, asking me to talk downstairs, away from Anya. My heart started racing, but I tried to keep my cool. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady, but inside I was screaming at myself to leave, to run. "Just talk," he slurred, his words thick with alcohol. His breath reeked, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. I followed him downstairs, every step feeling like I was walking deeper into a nightmare. The common area was empty, the lights dimmed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing, my back against the wall, ready to bolt if I had to. He started talking about the internet, how he wanted me to have a better connection for my work. But it didn't make sense. None of it did. The way he was looking at me, the way he kept glancing towards the stairs, it all felt wrong. "Cut the crap," I finally snapped, my patience wearing thin. "What do you really want?" He hesitated, his eyes shifting nervously before he finally admitted it. He wanted me to stay downstairs so he could be alone with Anya. Anya, who was upstairs asleep, completely unaware of what was happening. Panic surged through me. I had to get out of there. But more importantly, I had to warn her. I didn't say another word to him. I just turned and ran upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the room, I shook Anya awake, my voice trembling as I told her what had happened. "We need to leave," I urged, grabbing my things and shoving them into my bag. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The man had followed me upstairs, shouting that he had just made a mistake, but his words were empty, hollow, and I could see the darkness lurking behind his eyes. We didn't waste any time. We packed up our things and left the hostel, the man's desperate pleas echoing behind us. The cold night air hit us as we stepped outside, but it was a welcome relief. We found another place to stay, a small hotel a few blocks away. It wasn't much, but it was safe. The next morning, I reported the incident to the hostel's management and left a detailed review warning others about what had happened. For the rest of my trip, I couldn't shake the unease. Every hostel, every stranger, every shadow felt like a threat. The carefree excitement I had once felt about solo travel was replaced by a constant vigilance. But something else happened too. Anya and I, bonded by that terrifying night, became friends. We decided to stick together for the rest of our travels, and slowly, I began to feel that excitement return. I learned that it was okay to be cautious, to trust my instincts, and that not every situation would end in horror.
The offer had been too good to pass up. I was desperate, on my last legs after losing a major client, and the house had popped up on my radar at just the right time. It cost half the rent I was paying in my old place, and the building was a beautiful Victorian structure that wouldn't seem out of place in a period drama. I answered the ad, and within the week, all the contracts were signed, and I was ready to move in. The ad had mentioned sharing the space with 2 other tenants, but I didn't meet either of them until a few days after I had officially moved in. I also found a strange note waiting on my nightstand. House rules. Keep your door locked at all times. If someone knocks on your door, do not answer it. I figured it was one of the tenants playing a joke on me and decided to toss the scrap of paper into the bin, thinking nothing more of it as I unpacked my belongings into the space. The house was old, and there were traces of damp in the corners, but for the price, I could hardly complain. I met the first tenant while I was returning from a grocery store run, trying to shoulder through the front door with 2 large shopping bags. He was an older man, with straggly gray hair and wide eyes that always seemed to be darting everywhere. "Did you get the note?" he asked me as soon as he saw me, hardly bothering to greet me or introduce himself. I stared at him. Sorry? "The note! Understand? You read it, right? You need to follow the rules!" I swallowed, shifting the heavy bags as I stood in the entryway of the house. "I saw the note, yes," I said, frowning. He was the one who'd put it there? It didn't seem like he was joking either. "Never open your door," the man said, before turning away and disappearing back up the stairs. I didn't even know his name. I dismissed the odd encounter and began putting my groceries away. There were 3 people living here, including myself, and we'd each been assigned a shelf in the fridge. One of them contained nothing but some old pickles and a jar of jam. The other was completely empty. Mine was the only one with actual food on it. I met the second tenant as I was heading back up to my room. Though, perhaps, met is a stretch. I noticed as I was walking along the landing that the door on the left was partially ajar. A face, half obscured by darkness, was peering through the gap. When I noticed the figure, I jumped, and the door quickly slammed shut, the lock turning on the other side. It had only been for a second, but I was certain the face belonged to a woman. When I walked past her room, my nose twitched at a strange and rather unpleasant smell, though I couldn't figure out what it was. I didn't see either of them again over the next few days, though about a week after moving in, something strange happened. It was sometime in the early hours of the morning when I awoke to the sound of someone knocking on my door. I sat up in bed, still groggy from my sleep, and turned to face the door. The frantic rap of knuckles against the wood continued, rousing me completely awake. Climbing out of bed and shivering in the cold air, I began to reach for the handle when something tugged at the back of my head. A torn note left on my nightstand. "If someone knocks on your door, do not answer it." I pulled back my hand, swallowing nervously. Who would be knocking at my door at this time anyway? Well, instead of opening the door, I called out, "Who is it?" Immediately, the knocking stopped. The silence fell heavy around me. Then, as my heart lurched into my chest, the handle began to turn. For the sliver of a second, a panic thought crossed my mind. Had I locked the door before going to bed? I couldn't remember. But if it was open, then whoever was outside was about to come in, and I wasn't sure I wanted that. I grabbed the handle and twisted it the other way, stopping it from opening. "Who is it?" I called again, but nobody answered. Was it one of the tenants? The old paranoid man, or the strange woman? Or was it someone else completely? But that was impossible. No one could get inside the house except for the 3 of us and the landlord. The stranger on the other side kept trying to turn the handle, but I held it in place, my heart thudding wildly in my chest. On the other side of the door, I thought I might have heard a heavy, raspy breath. Or it could have been my own wheezing gasp as the handle was finally released. and I hastily slid the lock into place when I realized it had been open after all. I pressed my ear to the door and listened, hearing the soft creak of retreating footsteps. I didn't hear any doors open or close. The footsteps simply faded away, and the night went silent once more. I double-checked the lock and then went back to bed, though I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The strange old man was in the kitchen the next morning, eating pickles out of a jar. He looked up as I walked in, his eyes focusing on me.
"They visited you last night, didn't they?"
I froze, my throat tightening as I recalled the stranger outside my door. Who did? Who was that? The man cracked a wizened smile.
"Nobody knows who they are, but the last tenant who let them in went missing. Nobody ever saw them again. But as long as you remember the rules, you'll be fine."
I decided to do some research into the house and its previous tenants, and what I found made my blood run cold. According to an article I found online, a man by the name of Thomas Ingle had gone missing a few months ago, with his last known address the very same as the building I was living in. Nobody knew what had happened to him, and a body was never found. Whether or not his disappearance really was related to the person who had tried to get into my room last night, I didn't want to risk it. The peculiar tenant should have been a warning enough that staying there wasn't a good idea. That same afternoon, I packed up my things and left. I had a friend who offered to let me crash for a few days until I found somewhere else to live. Even if the rent was cheap, I wasn't desperate enough to risk ending up like the last person who'd rented there. And while I never did find out who had tried to get into my room that night, maybe that was for the best.
Last year, my fiancé Jake took me to his family's cabin in the mountains. He shared it with his brother and cousins, but we scheduled a time in early December to have the place to ourselves. I was so excited. I grew up in the desert, so I'd literally never seen snow before. I'd always known that my fiancé was rich, but I didn't know that he was filthy, stinking rich until I saw that cabin. It was a modern 2-story structure built along the slope of a mountain. It had its own servants' quarters. It had a sauna, 2 jacuzzis, and even a zip line, though that wasn't in use during the winter. This was literally the fanciest vacation house I'd ever seen, and Jake acted like it was some dump. "It's usually a lot prettier than this," he said. "We haven't had enough snow this season." The mountainside was still pretty snowy, but there were a lot of bare patches too. I still thought it was gorgeous. Jake took me inside, and we dropped off all our luggage in the upstairs bedroom. He explained that the master's bedroom was reserved for his globe-trekking brother Martin, the one member of his family I'd never met. From the way everyone talked about him, though, he seemed like a real weirdo. I was more than happy to stay out of his room. After we unpacked, Jake took me on a tour of the property. He said we'd just walk around the perimeter, but I had no idea that the property was so sprawling. 4 acres, though I don't know how much that is in feet or meters. Anyway, it was a lot of walking through the snow, and I didn't have the shoes for it. We reached the back corner of the property, the highest part elevation-wise. There was a huge, professionally made treehouse that he wanted to show me. "This is my favorite part of the whole mountain," Jake said proudly. "Come on." He started climbing up the ladder, expecting me to follow him, when he suddenly stopped and jumped back onto the ground. Never mind. I'm cold." He charged back towards the cabin, and I followed. I should have asked him why he suddenly changed his mind, but that felt too awkward. I could tell he was hiding something, though. We spent the rest of the evening together, neither of us mentioning the treehouse. I couldn't stop thinking about it, though. So that night, after Jake had finally fallen asleep, I snuck out of bed, slipped on my boots and jacket, and left. The mountain was so much scarier at night, but this was my only chance to see for myself. If I'd left during the daytime, Jake would have noticed. I used my cell phone's flashlight and trudged through the snow. I almost slipped a few times on the rocks, but eventually, I reached the treehouse. If Jake was hiding something from me, it must have been in this spot. I looked around the treehouse but didn't see anything suspicious. Then I started to climb up the hanging ladder, just like Jake had done before he rushed me back inside. I got about halfway up the tree when I was finally able to see what Jake had seen. There was a wide trough dug into the ground just past the treehouse. It wasn't visible until I climbed up high enough, but now I could look into it. I saw something horrible. Body parts. The pit was about a quarter filled with snow, and sticking out of the snow were arms and torsos and heads. It was a mass grave with a mixture of frozen corpses and full-on skeletons. Someone must have been using this death pit for decades. I was so shocked by what I saw that I lost my balance and fell backwards off the ladder. I would have landed hard on the icy ground, but someone caught me. Jake. He had followed me out here. He slowly lowered me onto my feet, his expression blank, but a little nervous too. I can explain. He stood between me and the house. He didn't look threatening, but he also didn't look like the man I fell in love with. Couldn't figure out why. Are you a killer? I asked him point blank. No, he answered. Martin is. Slowly and with deep shame, Jake told me that his entire family knew that his brother was a serial killer. They'd been ignoring it for years, just willfully turning a blind eye. Jake even admitted that he'd known about Martin's hiding spot, but he assumed all the bodies would be covered up by snow this time of year. Every word out of Jake's mouth horrified me. I could never look at him the same way again. Every single person in his family was an accessory to his brother's crimes. Why didn't Jake go to the police years ago? Why didn't anyone in his family? I pushed past Jake and walked back inside. I was about to dial 911, but he grabbed the phone out of my hand. Please, he said, just talk to Martin, hear him out. Then you can call the cops. I reluctantly agreed. I doubted that there was anything his brother could say to justify his actions, but Jake seemed so adamant. I thought he would use my phone to call his brother up, but instead, he ran into Martin's bedroom. Was Martin here right now? Had Jake lied to me before? I waited outside the bedroom door. I could hear Jake and his brother talking on the other side. Jake begged Martin to talk to me, and Martin eventually gave in. I waited about a minute before the door reopened and Martin stepped out. But it wasn't Martin at all. It was Jake in a curly wig and an ill-fitting business suit. What are you doing? I asked. I'm Martin, he said in an artificially low voice. Nice to finally meet you. You're real pretty. He brushed the loose wig hair away from his face. My brother is a lucky man. Your name is Martin? I asked carefully. I didn't want to upset him. Who knew what he was capable of? He reached out to shake my hand. Jake has told me so much about you. I'm sorry you found out about my hobby. He was talking about the dead bodies in the ground. Then he started explaining why he liked to kill. He talked about how Jake always got angry with him, how his family all helped him control his urges. It was all completely unhinged. I didn't really listen. I pretended to, but as he talked, clearly believing that he was Martin, I inched toward the door. Then, when I was far enough away, I raced to the car and drove off, leaving him there. That was the last time I ever dated a rich person. They're all insane. But at least I got to see snow for the first time.
This year, I had Thanksgiving with my boyfriend Troy's family. Before college, I was living in a foster home with a strict Jehovah's Witness family, so I'd never celebrated any holidays before. I was so excited. I'd never met his family, but he told me all about them. His parents were named Barb and Victor, and they had their own little farm in the country. His sister Gemma lived there with them. They all seemed like such cool people. When we arrived on Thanksgiving morning, I was shocked by how beautiful their place was. I didn't realize Troy's family was so rich. His parents greeted me with a big hug. They seemed like such sweet people. His sister was another story. She clearly didn't want me there. She just stood off to the side, glaring. Barb gave me a tour of the place and asked me all about myself. I didn't know how much Troy had told her about me, so I couldn't lie to her. I had to tell her that I grew up in a crazy religious foster family and that I didn't have any friends before college. And even now, all my friends were people that Troy introduced me to. I'm still extremely shy, but I am trying to move past that. Barb understood completely. She had a difficult childhood too. I felt a real connection with her. After the tour, I tried to help Barb get all the food ready for dinner, but she didn't want anyone else in her kitchen. Troy was watching football with his dad, so that gave me the opportunity to try to connect with Gemma. I joined her on the patio. She had something in her hand. "Oh, I have your keys." I thought my keys were in my pocket, but they must have fallen out when I was carrying in my luggage. "Thanks," I said and shoved them in my pocket. I tried to make small talk, but she kept squirming in her seat. She looked around to see if anyone else was listening. Then she leaned forward and whispered, "You're not safe here." I tried to ask her why, but then Barb walked into the room and Gemma totally clammed up. "What are you girls talking about?" "Nothing," Gemma answered nervously. That was all Barb needed to hear. She silently left. After that, Gemma wouldn't say anything at all. I left her there and I went to the guest bedroom so I could change my clothes. This was Troy's childhood bedroom, and it had all those old horror movie posters on the wall from when Troy was a kid. Troy had been into some really gross-looking movies back then. Anyway, as I was changing, Troy entered the room to check on me. He said it was halftime. I told him about my weird conversation with his sister. His face flashed with anger, but he quickly hid it. "Let me talk to her," he said, and left. He went to confront his sister on the patio directly under the guest bedroom, so all I had to do was open the window and I could hear everything they said. "I warned you not to say anything," I heard him say. "I'm sorry," Gemma's voice responded. "Don't hurt me." He answered her in a whisper, so I couldn't make out his words. Her response was also a whisper, but there was one word that I recognized. Well house. Didn't know what that meant. Pretty soon we had our big Thanksgiving dinner. Barb and Victor acted totally normal, but Gemma just stared at her food. And Troy kept glancing at her as if he was afraid that she might say something. It was really weird. After dinner was over, Gemma hurried out of the room without saying goodbye. Troy's parents started cleaning up, and Troy asked me if I wanted to join him for a walk around the farm. After everything that happened with his sister, I was a little scared to be along with him, but I said yes anyway. He took me outside and he showed me the barn where they kept their animals. Then he took me far away from the house to show me his favorite place. "And what's that?" I asked. "The well house," he said. "It's where we keep the water pumps for the whole property. Has a great view of the valley." He grabbed my hand and led me through the field. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face seemed dead serious, like he was on a mission. I tried to pull away, but he clamped down tighter on my hand. "What are you doing?" "This is about my sister, isn't it?" he said. "What else did she tell you?" "Literally nothing." I had no idea what was going on, but I decided to bluff. "She told me everything." "Damn it!" he shouted. Then he forced himself to calm down. "Baby, it's not what you think. Those other women were terrible people. They deserved what they got. But you're different. Trust me." Other women? The way he said that gave me the chills. Doesn't sound like he was talking about ex-girlfriends. It sounded like he was talking about his victims. By then, we'd arrived at the well house, which was right next to a deep trench in the ground. And as soon as I saw it, I knew he was going to throw me down there. I don't know how I knew it, but I did. He was going to throw me into that hole and leave me there to die. just like he'd done to who knows how many others.
"You never loved me, did you?" I asked. "You just picked me because you knew no one would miss me when I'm gone."
That made him smile. "You're smarter than I thought." Then he twisted my arm painfully, forcing me closer to the trench. With my free hand, I reached into my pockets to find anything I could use to fight him off. All I had were my car keys. I pulled those out and got ready to swipe him with them, but I noticed something clipped onto the keyring that I'd never seen before. It was pepper spray. I'd never owned pepper spray before. Then I remembered that Gemma had my keys earlier. She must have put it on. He was shoving me backward, still not using his full strength. He didn't think I was much of a threat. He wasn't expecting me to spray him right in the face. He screamed in surprise and pain, letting go of my throbbing hand. As he wiped at his eyes, I shoved him. He toppled into the massive hole, suffering the same fate he had planned for me. I heard him whimpering from the bottom, but I couldn't see him through the darkness. I left him there and walked back inside. Barb saw me first. She looked shocked. I wordlessly walked past her and used their house phone to call 911. Barb and Victor exchanged a look. They both knew what had happened.
"Well, I guess it's time to face the music," Barb said.
They held hands and sat together, waiting for the police to arrive. They'd allowed their son's crimes for long enough. I hated them, but I felt sorry for them too. I joined Gemma on the porch, thanking her for the pepper spray. As we waited for the police, she told me what it was like to live with a psychopath for a brother, and parents who let him get away with anything. She'd tried to stop Troy so many times, but she always failed. Until now. For the first time, my own life didn't seem all that bad. Rain lashed the windows of the car, the windscreen wipers working diligently to keep the glass unobscured as I drove down the dark country lane. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as the tires skidded on the slick asphalt, thick droplets of water continuing to pelt the roof with heavy thuds. I shouldn't have been out driving this late, but there'd been an emergency at the hospital I worked at, and I'd had to stay overtime to help deal with it. Now it was just past 11 o'clock at night, and I was stuck driving home in the rain. I had passed a few other cars back on the interstate, but none in the past 20 minutes since I'd turned onto the twisty back road through the forest. I usually had no problems driving this way when it was still light out, but the dark of the night made everything seem far more treacherous. The tires jerked over something hard in the middle of the road, making my stomach lurch. I hadn't seen anything in the glow of the headlights, and I told myself it was probably just a rock or something, and definitely not an animal. When I flicked a glance up into my rear view, I might have glimpsed two rheumy-looking eyes staring back at me. Or it might have just been my imagination. I swallowed and kept driving, lifting my eyes to the sky. It was pitch dark. No stars, no moon, just blackness through the veil of rain. The road ahead dipped, and I eased down on the brakes, squinting when headlights suddenly pierced the gloom ahead of me. Another car? The lights didn't get any closer, and as I shielded my eyes from the glare, I realized the car wasn't moving. I slowed the car to a crawl, inching past the other vehicle to get a better look. Had they broken down? Did they need some help? When I saw the crumpled bonnet, it dawned on me that they had probably been in some kind of accident. It was late, and I probably should have just kept driving, but as a nurse, it was against my judgment to just abandon someone who needed help, especially if there was a chance they were hurt. I pulled the car to a stop a little further down the road, making sure there was enough space for any other cars to get past, and cut the engine. Grabbing the keys from the ignition, I climbed out into the rain. Shivering, I hurried over to the car, holding a hand over my face to shield the rain from my eyes. I heard a car door open, and a figure dashed through the rain towards me. "I'm so glad you stopped," a voice said, low and masculine, as the man stopped in front of me. It was hard to make out much of his face through the undulating shadows cast by the headlights, but he seemed young, maybe only a few years older than me. I've been stuck here for God knows how long. My phone's out of juice and I haven't been able to call for help. Oh, you can borrow mine. Are you hurt at all? It looks like you've been in a crash. Yeah, well, luckily I managed to get away unharmed. Just a bit of whiplash. I looked again at the front of the car, at the crumpled metal. It didn't look like a bad crash, at least. And when I threw a glance across the road, there was no debris or skid marks, which was odd. Surely there wasn't enough damage for the car to be stuck here. Shaking it off, I returned my gaze to the man. I'll just go and grab my phone from my car and we can call someone to help, I told him. Thank you so much, he said, pressing his hands together gratefully. I offered him a faint smile, the cold rain dripping down my eyes, and turned back to my car. All I had to do was call for help and he could sort the rest out. I'd rather not stay out here any longer than necessary. I barely made it a few steps, however, when I felt movement behind me, an ice-cold shadow across my back, and something slammed into the back of my head. My knees buckled, the ground tilting beneath me as pain and dizziness exploded through my head. I hit the ground hard, gasping as everything spun around me. Behind me, I heard the man's footsteps draw closer, splashing through puddles. What was he going to do to me? I crawled forward across the road, fighting against the darkness that was starting to creep into my vision. I had to stay conscious or it would be over for me. Blood ran down my head from where he'd struck me, dripping into my eyes and blurring my vision. I could barely see a few meters ahead of me, but I knew I had to get to my car and get the hell out of there. A hand grabbed my foot and dragged me backwards, my scream muffled beneath the pouring rain. Why was this happening to me? Is this what I got for trying to help someone? With a sobbing shout, I thrashed and kicked behind me. I heard the man grunt and let go, and I used the opportunity to scramble back onto my feet, almost slipping on the wet ground. Without looking where I was going, I started running. My heart thudded wildly in my chest, and I could barely hear anything over the pulse in my ears, but I was vaguely aware of the man chasing after me. I took a second to look around. Somehow, I'd managed to run in the opposite direction to my car. Cursing under my breath, I instead dashed into the trees, wiping blood and tears out of my eyes as twigs and branches smacked me in the face, tearing at my skin and clothes. I had to get out of there, away from that psycho. If only I hadn't turned my back to him. The ground gave way beneath me, and I lurched forward, tumbling down a ditch I hadn't seen before. I kept tumbling down, branches and underbrush scratching my skin to shreds, until I finally reached the bottom, where my head hit something hard. A rock, maybe, or a log. I fought to stay conscious for another second before everything else went dark. When I awoke, I was still lying at the bottom of the ditch. Around me, the forest was still, quiet. My head felt heavy and sore, and when I pressed a hand to my hair, something wet and sticky coated my fingers. How long had I been out? And where had that man gone? Was he still out there, or had he just left me here to die? I sat up slowly, fighting the nausea that threatened to rip through my stomach. After waiting for the dizziness to abate, I managed to pull myself to my feet and look around. It was still night, but it seemed like the rain had stopped, which meant some time must have passed since I passed out. The ditch I'd fallen down was a lot less steep than it had felt, and I managed to climb back up without too much difficulty. Dusting off my hands, I began picking my way through the trees, back towards the direction of the road. Around me, the forest was in silence. Hopefully that meant the man was no longer around. I finally made it back to the road. Only one car was parked within view, and it was mine. I breathed out a heavy sigh of relief, digging the keys out of my pocket and unlocking the vehicle. As soon as I was inside, I locked all the doors and reached for my phone, calling 911 to explain what had happened. If I hadn't managed to get away, I had no idea what that man might have done to me. Stuffed me in the trunk of his car, or killed me right there on the side of the road. It didn't matter anymore. All I knew was that that was the last time I was helping someone in the middle of the night. No way! I blurted as I slammed my palm against the steering wheel. My instinctive reaction to the frustration that I felt was to grind my teeth together. My car had stopped of its own accord, in flooding weather on the road. Like a mocking reminder, the pattering of raindrops against the roof of the car deepened my sense of desolation. The view on the screen of the car was utterly black, an isolated pitch blackness that my gaze could not pierce through. A violent thrum of rain came at once, and I sunk into my seat. I was all alone, I realized, as far away from work as I was from my home. My stomach sank. I reclined in the seat and decided in the moment that I had no choice except pushing my car from where I was to the Walmart, which was luckily about a minute away from where I was. It was a manual transmission, so it would not be a difficult task for me. I slipped from the car seat and braved the rain once I had made sure all of the mechanics of the car were in place before I started to push. "You piece of shit!" I cried as I walked around the car to the back. I kicked the tire of the car for good measure, and to expel the rage that I was feeling. The 5-minute walk from where I was to the Walmart lasted about 20 minutes pushing the car. It was a most tedious task, one that wore me out. By the time I finally arrived at the Walmart parking lot, I was breathless and gasping for air. The rain fell with the same ferocity, with no sign of letting up. I checked the time, and I was at least 30 minutes late from the usual time that I would arrive at home. I cussed at my luck as I whipped my phone from my pocket. With a quick run through the contacts on my phone, I was able to reach a tow truck. "There's a monstrous storm out here. We'll be with you when it lets up," the attendant at the tow truck company said to me when I asked for availability. It was obvious, wasn't it, that the rain was not one that could aid driving. I had been stupid, and regretted that I had allowed myself to drive in that rain. My engine was toast. Kissed my teeth. Wouldn't even start even if I tried. The futility of it all, from the thought of it, made me snicker at my own loss. "Hey, man," someone called me from behind. He was a tall man, 6 feet and at least 3 inches from what I observed. His skin was pale, and his appearance was of one well-tended. He had a lanky physique, the type that forced his shoulders to hunch over and his shirt to hang by the scruff of his neck. A broad shoulder caused his blue and white striped shirt to appear longer on his body because of the way it draped on him like a curtain. He wore black pants and a pair of boots. I sighed when I registered his appearance. "Are you good?" he asked me, stepping closer. I nodded my head to dismiss him. Still, he was persistent. He moved closer to me, and I noticed his eyes, sharp as an eagle's. He had an unsettling glance in the depths of his eyes that made me uneasy at first. "You don't have to lie to me. I work here. I saw you push your car in," he said, and flailed his hands in the direction of the parking lot. He flashed me a smile, and some of my unease evaporated. He mentioned his name, Brandon. I played a good sport and reciprocated by telling him my name was Luis. It was an exotic name, he claimed. Was I foreign? He asked. And he added that I did not look like I was from a different country. I answered truthfully that I was not. My parents had a very good friend in their youth who was Colombian, and they had named me after him. He clapped his hands delightfully and told me that it meant the world to him that people were able to have such friendships with each other. Then he asked me again if I had any problems. By the time he had asked again, he had charmed his way into me, and I found myself unable to resist him. "The damn engine stopped just a minute down the road. You wouldn't believe it." He noted that I was drenched. He asked if I was waiting for someone to come get me. I told him I wasn't. How was I going to get home? He asked. I told him I'd called the tow truck and that they were going to come get the vehicle. I'd probably hitch a ride home from the Walmart. He offered to help me. I just finished my shift and I'm headed home. If you want me to, I could drop you off at yours before driving home, he said. It was a harmless proposal. One that swayed my decision to accept it before I even processed the information. I gave him my address, and his face lit up. He knew the place well enough. I was lucky, he commented, and without further conversation, he asked me to join him in the car. Brandon had so much chemistry with his car that it made driving with him so much fun. His car was nothing like my manual vehicle that pissed me off so much. I mused at how good it would be to get one of these. The ride was smooth and the journey was fun. Until it wasn't. Brandon, I think you took the wrong turn, I muttered quietly to not betray the panicking pang of my heart. I know, he said matter-of-factly. The blood in my veins ran cold. My brows furrowed, and my beating heart started to thrash even louder than the storming rain. It was difficult to breathe as fear started to envelop me. Without thinking, I turned to the door and tried to pull it open. It wouldn't budge. Sheer horror made my fingers cold. "Open the damn door!" I yelled, turning around to him. But he was faster, because when I swung, he already had a knife in hand, blade glistening even in the dark. "I don't work for Walmart. How the did you believe that?" He cackled maniacally as he teased the knife down my throat. "I'm gonna have fun with your body. I can feel the rush already," he declared. I could already feel my vision dimming out as fear crippled me and drove me dizzy. It was difficult to believe that I had just walked into a serial killer's arms and nobody knew where I was. I pleaded with him to let me go, and he called me a fool who deserved to die. I could not think clearly. I was so afraid that nothing made sense in my head. Not even when I pilfered through his glove compartment with the knife to my neck and found the central unlocking system. The doors clicked, and I sensed the tension reach such a climax that I was numb. I jumped out of Brandon's moving car, defying the near-fatal repercussion that may have happened. I took off on foot in the darkness, and I ran as fast as I could until I couldn't run anymore, and it was all pitch black. When my eyes opened, I was in the hospital. I was told that I had been found by a good Samaritan who I had told, in my delirium, that I was being chased by a serial killer. The police had run the plates, and a trail of missing persons had been last seen at that Walmart, just like me. A search for Brandon has also led to his arrest, and an investigation is still on to establish the full extent of his crime. In October, my husband Dan admitted that he had lost most of our savings through online gambling. This came as a huge shock. For one thing, I had no idea that Dan was interested in gambling at all. He'd never even mentioned it before. More importantly, though, I trusted him more than anyone. As soon as he told me, I could barely look him in the eyes anymore. I could tell he felt guilty, but it was going to be a long time before I could even consider forgiving him. He enrolled in Gamblers Anonymous, and I had to take on a second job just so that we could get the bills paid on time. I was hired as a temporary worker at Target, just for the holiday season. The gigs started a few days before Black Friday, and I was genuinely nervous. I knew how crazy Black Friday was. It was the one day of the year when people acted like absolute animals just to save money on presents. After my first day, my new coworker, Debbie, pulled me aside and assured me that Black Friday wouldn't be as bad as I thought. I guess she could tell that I was nervous. She explained that the shopping stampedes only happened in large urban areas, not small towns like ours. She also said that all of the craziest customers had already been banned from the store. Well, Debbie had been working at the same Target for over a decade, so I trusted her. On the morning of Black Friday, I clocked in at 7 in the morning. I was right on time, but all my coworkers were already there, organizing displays and psyching themselves up for the hard day ahead. By 7:15, there was already a huge line outside our doors. I could see the crowd through our windows, and I instantly got nervous again. Debbie walked over and told me to take a deep breath. "I think we're done setting up the front. Why don't you go take out the trash before things get too crazy? And if you see anything out there, remember to bring it back inside." I think she was doing me a favor. She wanted me to go outside for a bit and clear my head. So I went to the back of the store and grabbed the bags filled with all the autumn-themed displays that we had to throw out. The dumpsters were right next to our back door, so it wouldn't take me long. But when I got outside, 2 heavy bags in my arms, a woman was waiting for me. "Hey," she said, "you Debbie's friend?" Yeah, I said. "Great, let me in." She explained that she and Debbie were sisters. Every Black Friday, Debbie helped her sneak in early so she could get first dibs on all the best deals. Now, my first instinct was to tell her no. I didn't want to lose my job on my first week. But then I thought about Debbie. She was my only work friend so far, and I didn't want to lose that. She'd sent me out here for a reason. She clearly trusted me enough to help out her sister. Plus, if they'd been doing this for years, then it wasn't that big a deal, right? So I eventually gave in and let her inside. Still had to throw out the bags of trash, though. As I was tossing them in the dumpster, the door slammed shut behind me. The woman had locked me out. I didn't have my keys with me, so I pounded on the door, demanding that she let me back inside. Through the small window on the door, I could see the woman look directly at me and flip me off, and then she was gone. I knew I was in big trouble. Maybe that woman didn't know Debbie at all. I still had a key to the front doors, but I couldn't go that way because the mob of people would shove their way through. My only choice was to call Debbie and ask her to open the door for me. She answered on the first ring. "Debbie," I said, trying not to sound panicked, "I got locked out." "Oh," she said. She paused for a long moment before asking, "You didn't let anyone inside, did you?" I had to tell her the truth. I told her about her sister and how she locked me outside. "Oh God, no!" she screamed into the phone. "She's not my sister!" I waited for Debbie to explain who this was because she clearly knew the woman. But then I heard a loud bang, and Debbie didn't say anything else. I stood there in stunned silence until the back door reopened and the woman came back out. "All done," she said. "Thanks." She casually walked past me and disappeared around the corner. She left the door open, though, so I went back inside. I heard a bunch of shouting voices, but I couldn't figure out what had happened until I saw Debbie bleeding on the ground. She had been shot in the stomach. "Oh, why did you let her in?" she moaned. Those were her dying words. After that, a policeman came to ask me some questions. He took me into the staff room where he waited for me to stop crying. I told him everything. He pointed to a row of pictures on the wall, all the faces of past customers who were banned from the store. "Do you recognize any of these people?" he asked. And sure enough, I saw the woman's face looking down at me from the wall. Under her photo was a description written in marker. "Extremely dangerous. Multiple employees have a restraining order against her. Call the police immediately if you see her." "That's her," I said. The policeman told me not to leave town. My boss walked in, wiping tears from her eyes, and said I should leave the store immediately. Our location was closed for the rest of the day, the first time they had ever missed Black Friday. I can't tell you how guilty I feel. I was so desperate not to make any mistakes at my new job, and now because of that, I'd accidentally let my friend get murdered. Now my husband's gambling mistakes don't seem so bad. My girlfriend, Alicia, and I had been renting an apartment for a few months before we met the landlord. It was a nice place in a nice area, and the landlord had seemed amicable enough during our phone conversations, though we'd never actually seen each other in person due to him living further away. The apartment itself was situated in a fairly quiet part of town, and although we hadn't made many friends in the area, we had settled in well enough and planned to stay for a while, so long as the rent didn't increase too much. One afternoon, a couple of months after moving in, there was a knock at the door. My girlfriend was out at the time, and I thought that maybe she'd forgotten a key and she needed me to let her back in, since I wasn't expecting anyone. I got up from the sofa to answer the door, and I found a middle-aged man standing on the threshold. He was tall and lanky, with a mop of dark hair and tanned, leathery-looking skin. "Hello," he said, sticking out his hand towards me. "I'm Jack." I stared at him for a moment of silence before it clicked. Jack was the name of our landlord. "Oh, hi," I said, taking his hand and shaking it. "It's good to finally meet you." He was a little older than I had expected based on our previous interactions over the phone, and his voice was a little more nasally than I remembered. But, everyone sounded different on a phone. "I just wanted to see how you were settling in. Encountered any issues?" Jack continued, letting his hand fall back to his side. I noticed a tool belt around his waist, and I wondered if he worked on maintenance and DIY in the building as well as being the landlord. "Nah, everything's good," I told him. "We're both happy here." "Great to hear," he said, smiling at me with his teeth. He hesitated, seeming reluctant to leave. "I'm sorry to ask, but would you mind if I used your bathroom?" I blinked at him in surprise. Felt like an odd request, but since he was the landlord, I felt awkward refusing. Sure," I said, letting him in. "Thanks. I won't be a minute." He disappeared down the hallway, and a second later I heard the bathroom door lock shut. I waited in the front room, hoping he would leave right after he was done. It was good to finally put a face to the person, but that didn't mean I wanted him hanging around. When he didn't come back after 5 minutes, I went to go see what was taking so long. I didn't want him to be snooping around the apartment or something. He might have been the landlord, but my girlfriend and I were the ones living here, and we had the right to our own privacy. The bathroom door was still shut, and as I stood in the hallway outside, I heard a soft thump from within. "Everything all right?" I called, frowning when I heard another faint thud and a metallic clang. What was he doing in there? After a second, the door opened, and Jack stood with a wrench in his hand, scratching a hand over his stubbled cheek. "It looks like your toilet's broken," he told me. I stared at him in confusion and then glanced over his shoulder where there was water leaking across the floor from the toilet. "Huh? But it seemed fine earlier." "It shouldn't take me too long to fix," he continued, either ignoring or not noticing my obvious puzzlement. Surely I would have noticed if there was a leak before. Had it only happened just now? Or had Jack done something to it on purpose? Surely he didn't expect me to pay him to fix it. "No extra charge, of course," he continued, as if he was reading my thoughts. "As the landlord, it's my duty to make sure this place is up to scratch for my tenants." I decided to trust him for the moment and nodded. "All right, if you think it's an easy fix," I said, because I did want to keep up an amicable relationship with my landlord, even if he did seem a bit strange. "Easy as pie, I reckon," he said, with another toothy grin. Do you need anything?" I asked, but he shook his head, patting the belt around his waist. "Got everything I need right here." He turned and headed back into the bathroom, whistling under his breath. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer, until he shot me a pointed look, as if he didn't want me to watch him fix it. I still felt a little off about the whole thing, but I left him to fix the toilet and I wandered back into the front room, wondering when Alicia would be getting home. She was always much better at dealing with people than I was. I heard another series of thumps, bangs, and clatters from the bathroom, but I fought the urge to go and check on him. He knew this place better than I did, so I had to put some trust into the fact that he knew what he was doing. Alicia turned up about 10 minutes later, while Jack was still working on the toilet. As soon as she heard the noises from the bathroom, she shot me a confused look. "What's that?" I explained what had happened, and she went to go introduce herself to Jack. I trailed after her, wondering if he was almost done. It had been 15 minutes, after all, and he had said it was an easy fix. Jack was on his knees, doing something behind the toilet basin when Alicia cleared her throat and introduced herself from the doorway. The landlord quickly stood up and turned around, wiping a hand over his sweat-slicked brow. "Oh, hello, I'm Jack. Nice to meet you." Alicia's eyes widened slightly when she saw him, but she plastered a fake smile on her lips and nodded. "It's nice to meet you too," she said, a tightness in her voice that hadn't been there before. I observed silently from behind her, wondering why she was acting so strange. Did she recognize him? She caught my eye with an unspoken message, and I cleared my throat. "We'll leave you to get on." The two of us left him and congregated in the kitchen, where Alicia grabbed my arm and whispered urgently to me, "That's not the landlord." I stared at her, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I've seen a picture of him," she continued, her voice a little breathless, "and he looks nothing like that. Who the hell have you let into our home?" I don't know," I stuttered, the reality of the situation sinking in. Had I let a complete stranger into our apartment? Was I letting a complete stranger fix the toilet? Had it even been broken to start with? "He knocked on our door and introduced himself as Jack. What else was I supposed to think? I've never seen the landlord before." Alicia shook her head and pinched the bridge of her nose. "What do we do? We need to get him out of here." I bit my lip ruminatively. "Maybe I could ask him for some ID or something? If he realizes we're onto him, he might leave on his own." "Okay. But if it doesn't work, I'm calling the police." I nodded and hurried back to the toilet, an anxious flutter in my chest. I couldn't believe that I'd let a complete stranger into our apartment. Even if I didn't know what Jack looked like, I should have at least asked for some form of identification to prove who he was, or trusted my gut instinct. But now that I thought about it, he really sounded nothing like the man we'd been speaking to on the phone, the real landlord. So, just who was this man? "So, Jack, I should have asked you this earlier, but do you have some kind of ID?" The man cocked his head at me, his dark brows furrowing. "ID? Yeah, I continued, forcing myself not to lose my nerve. I had to check who this man was. My girlfriend kindly reminded me that I shouldn't go letting strangers into the apartment without, confirming their identity." The man's lips thinned, and for a moment it was almost like he was sneering at me. "I don't have any ID on me," he said matter-of-factly. I became astutely aware of the wrench he was still holding in his hand. Now that I knew he wasn't who he said he was, the tool looked a lot more threatening than before. He had to have broken the toilet on purpose, to give himself a reason to stick around. What his intentions were, however, I had no idea, and I didn't want to find out. "I'm going to ask you to leave then," I said, trying to keep calm. The stranger stepped towards me, the wrench swinging between his fingers, and I swallowed down the panic in my throat. "Oh? Why is that? Because you don't believe me?" I eyed the wrench. Was he going to hurt me? Had that been his intention from the start? Waiting for me to lower my guard before he acted? Luckily, the stranger never got the chance to do anything. Alicia had already called the police while I was talking to him, and they arrived while he was still cornering me in the bathroom. They escorted him out of the apartment, and we never saw him again. After that, I was a lot more wary about letting people into the apartment. I was never good at being alone. The city had always felt like a maze of strangers, and I had become a ghost drifting through its neon-lit streets. I moved here for work, leaving behind the small town where I had friends, family, and a sense of belonging. Video games had been my solace, the only constant in my new, empty life. Then, I met her. Her name was Emily. She had an infectious laugh, a spark in her eyes that could light up the darkest room, and a sense of adventure that drew me in like a moth to a flame. We met at a mutual friend's party, and before I knew it, we were spending every free moment together. For the first time since I moved, I felt alive. Emily became my world. So, when she told me about her dream of backpacking through Asia, I couldn't say no. I had to support her. I watched her plan, pack, and finally leave. And then the loneliness returned, more suffocating than ever. I found myself counting the days until she came back, each one stretching into eternity. I tried to fill the void with video games, but they no longer held any joy. The city felt even colder, its streets more labyrinthine. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that I first heard the whispers. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, a symptom of my growing depression. But the whispers persisted, a soft murmur in the dark corners of my apartment. I couldn't make out the words, but they were there, just beyond the edge of comprehension. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Shadows that moved when they shouldn't. Figures that vanished when I turned to look. I told myself it was the loneliness, the stress of missing Emily. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to get out of the apartment, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. As I walked through the empty streets, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I ended up at a small, rundown bar at the edge of the city. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where the bartender had seen it all. I ordered a drink and sat in a corner, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. "Rough night?" the bartender asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You have no idea," I replied, taking a sip of my drink. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, leaning against the bar. "Maybe I have," I muttered, more to myself than to him. The bartender raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. As the night wore on, the bar filled with people, the noise drowning out the whispers in my head. For a moment, I felt almost normal. But when I left, the presence was there, waiting for me. I hurried home, my mind racing. I locked the door behind me, but I knew it wouldn't keep out whatever was haunting me. I turned on every light in the apartment, hoping the brightness would chase away the shadows. But the whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to deepen. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the middle of the living room, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for something, anything, to happen. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted, but the whispers had stopped. I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing, a result of stress and lack of sleep. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that. The presence was always there, lurking just out of sight, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I started avoiding the apartment as much as possible. I spent my days wandering the city, trying to lose myself in the crowds. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One evening, I found myself back at the bar. The bartender gave me a sympathetic look as I ordered my drink. "You look like hell," he said. "I feel like it," I replied. "What's going on with you?" he asked, his tone more serious than before. I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell him. "I've been seeing things, hearing things. I think something is following me." He didn't laugh or brush it off. Instead, he nodded, slowly. "There are things in this world we don't understand. Sometimes they latch onto us when we're vulnerable." How do I get rid of it?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "There are ways," he said, leaning closer. "But they're not easy, and they're not without risk." "I'll do anything," I said, my hands trembling. He gave me a long, hard look before nodding. "Come back tomorrow night. I'll have something for you." I left the bar feeling a strange mix of hope and fear. I didn't know what the bartender had in mind, but I was willing to try anything. That night, the whispers were louder than ever, and I barely slept. The next evening, I returned to the bar. The bartender was waiting for me, a small, worn book in his hands. "This is an old book," he said, handing it to me. "It has rituals and spells. They might help you, but be careful. These things have a way of turning on you." I took the book, feeling its weight in my hands. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good luck," he replied, his expression grave. I went home and started reading the book. It was filled with strange symbols and incantations, things that made my skin crawl. But I was desperate. I chose a ritual that seemed straightforward, one that promised to banish malevolent spirits. I gathered the necessary items, candles, salt, a mirror, and set up in the living room. As I began the ritual, I felt the presence grow stronger, the whispers turning into a cacophony of voices. I forced myself to keep going, chanting the words from the book. The air grew cold, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive. I saw a figure in the mirror, a dark, twisted shape that sent a wave of terror through me. I kept chanting, my voice shaking but determined. Suddenly, the figure lunged at me, and I felt a searing pain in my chest. I fell to the floor, clutching at the wound, but the ritual wasn't complete. I dragged myself back to the mirror, blood staining the carpet, and finished the incantation. There was a blinding flash of light, and then silence. The presence was gone. The whispers had stopped. I lay on the floor, gasping for breath, but alive. In the days that followed, the shadows retreated, and the city seemed a little less daunting. Emily's messages from Asia became my lifeline. Her words a reminder that I wasn't alone. I started playing video games again, reconnecting with old friends online. When Emily finally came back, I told her everything. She listened, her eyes wide with concern, but she believed me. We moved to a new apartment, one filled with light and laughter. The shadows stayed away, and the whispers became a distant memory. The city no longer felt like a maze of strangers. With Emily by my side, it became a place of possibilities, a place where I could build a new life. And as the days turned into weeks and months, I found that the loneliness had been replaced by something stronger. Hope.
When my father died, I did not feel any sadness. All I felt was a deep sense of relief that all his troubles and his sullenness had now ceased. The hope that he would finally find peace encouraged me. My father was not a bad man or a sick man. He was just a man. Perhaps I misunderstood him, and he was more than that. My father lived alone and quietly in a small house he had built in his 30s with my mother before she passed. He was a man who worked hard. It was evident in the fact that the company he started with his best friend was successful enough to keep them in business for 20 years, until he finally quit 15 years ago and said nothing about it. "I don't want to talk about it," he would say whenever he was asked about it. He never lost his composure in the face of the question, or gave any indications that he may have a confession at some point in his life, so the questions naturally died away after the first year when he quit the company. For 15 years of his life, after he quit that company, my father never left the house. Occasionally, he would be of good cheer, and he would have a drink as he would usually do, so nothing seemed amiss with all of it. But I could sense him hollow out every time we met and spoke. His eyes gazed distantly, like he was staring beyond you when he looked at you. When he was alone, or perceived he was alone, he would move his lips sometimes without actually uttering any words. You could see him ponder deeply when his mind would roam to some intangible place where only he could access in his mind. It was in the way that his facial features would alter itself. His fine nose would wrinkle up slowly in disgust, and his eyes would squint as though he were about to burst into tears. His mouth would quiver, and his cheeks would blush a deep pink. Snapping out of his thoughts, he would suddenly recover himself and continue as though it had not happened. I fear he suffered more than he ever let on in those days. He was a man that lived with the natural stature and humor of his age, but his death had not been unexpected. "Hey, Max, your father is dead." The call had been matter-of-factly, and truly I had not felt sadness. I did not ask what had killed him or how he had been found, but I was told that he had been found dead in his sleep on the couch. The rest of the detail as to who found him was numbed out of my senses by a wearying noise of reconciliation that my father truly was dead. I heard what was being said, but I did not understand it. Perhaps out of empathy, the neighbors noticed and they let me be, leaving for their houses while I was alone to handle the rest of it with the officials. His body was moved to a morgue, and I called everyone from the family to inform them of what had happened as clearly and concisely as I could. It was what he would have wanted me to do, I thought to myself, as I sauntered around the house that he called home for 15 years in those moments following his death. In his room, I found everything in order, just as my father always kept it. His clothes had been neatly stacked in the drawers, and all his books were in neat rows on the shelf. I went through his stuff curiously, but I did not dwell on any of it until I encountered an antique box that I had not seen until that day. It was a combination lock piece, which captivated me even in my grief, and I sought a way to examine what it contained. 1965. I read out the combination lock of his birth year as I slid the numbers on the lock, and the box opened up once I had done it. In this box, I found pictures of my father that I had not seen. He was a much different man in those pictures. He had a bright smile on his face. I did not want to stare at it for too long, lest it broke my heart, so I put it away. The box contained letters, postcards, and some paraphernalia from his days as a young man. I inhaled deeply and moved all the stuff he owned from it. The box had to go, I thought to myself, because it looked like it could fetch a good amount of money that would cover a decent part of his funeral cost. I took a few pictures of the box and put it up for sale on eBay. The box sold quickly, just as I expected, and I had enough money for the funeral, which had friends and other family members around. And for the first time in 15 years, I saw his best friend, who told me about my father and how much of a good man he was. In the same breath, he offered to talk to me in private. I obliged him, feeling grateful that he had come anyway. "Listen to me, Max. There is a box that your father and I share. It must be somewhere in this house, protected by him before he died. I want to have it," he said coolly, his tone firm and his eyes unwavering. "What box?" I retorted, giving him an unamused look. "I can find it. You just have to permit me so I can search." He maintained the same cool demeanor. "Have some respect. You'll do no such search," I spat back at him, angered by his audacity. "You don't understand. If that box gets out of this room, all of my life's work is done and I go to prison. That is not a risk I want to take," he threatened. I did not understand the implications of it, so I insisted that he would not search the house. Matter of fact, I said to him, he had to leave the funeral. In a flash, he pointed a gun at me, and he didn't seem so cool anymore. I felt the blood in my veins clog. Staring into the barrel of his gun had my spirit levitate from my body. I gasped for breath in fear that he perceived that fear in me. I have no qualms putting a bullet through your brain if that is all it will take to get to the box. Now tell me, where is it? He appeared deranged, like a mad scientist. It filled me with so much horror that I started to babble. With one hand, he pushed back the safety of the gun. Without thinking, I lunged at him as a shot went off. "Shit!" he cussed as he scrambled towards the gun, realizing it was too late to do me any harm as the gunshot had alerted the neighbors and funeral attendees, who would call the cops. Frightened to the point of blindness, I ran with no idea where I was running towards, with my only thought to escape him. When I was in a room in the house, I examined myself to ensure I had not been shot. The police came some moments later, but he was gone with the rest of the funeral attendants. With the box gone, I knew I also had to go as far away as possible from where he could find me.
When I moved into apartment 4B, I thought my life was finally coming together. After months of searching, I'd found a decent place in the city, with rent I could afford. The only downside was that I had a roommate. But with how expensive everything was, splitting the rent was the only option. And to be fair, Lena seemed fine at first. She was quiet, kept to herself. She worked long hours at the hospital, so I figured we'd rarely see each other anyway. The first strange thing happened the week I moved in. It was late one night, and I was sitting on the couch half asleep watching reality TV. Lena hadn't come home yet, but I heard footsteps in the hallway, and then a loud crash outside the door. I rushed over, swinging it open, only to find her sprawled out on the floor, groceries scattered everywhere. "Are you okay?" I asked, bending down to help her up. She winced, rubbing her ankle. "I slipped. Again." "Again?" She sighed. "I'm kind of clumsy." There was something in how she said it. A hesitation, like there was more to the story. But I let it slide. Everyone has their quirks. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice more things. Lena's clumsiness wasn't normal. It was constant. Plates would slip from her fingers, shattering on the floor. She'd stub her toe on the same coffee table every day. Once, she spilled boiling water on her hand while making tea. I'd never seen someone with such bad luck. Still, I chalked it up to her being accident-prone. It wasn't until the fire that I wondered if there was more to the story. It was late, sometime around midnight, and I was just about to drift off when I smelled smoke. Groggy, I stumbled out of bed and into the living room. And that's when I saw the flames licking up from the stove. "Lena!" I screamed, rushing to grab a towel and smother the flames. The fire was small enough that I put it out quickly, but panic gripped my chest. If I hadn't woken up, the whole complex could have gone up in flames. Lena appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with fear.
"I am so sorry," she whispered. I must have forgotten to turn it off after cooking."
"Forgot?" I snapped. "You could have burned the whole place down!" She cowered and continued apologizing. Later, I heard her crying in her room. Her clumsiness almost cost us and other people our homes. I talked to her later, and she kept apologizing. I told her to be more careful next time. A part of me felt bad for coming down so hard on her. I started wondering if she had some disorder that caused her to be forgetful or something. Anyway, a few weeks after the fire, someone walked into our home and stole my laptop. I was so confused because I could have sworn that I was the last one in, and I definitely locked the door behind me. I assumed that Lena must have gone out after I'd gotten home and forgotten to lock it. That was on par with what I'd seen before, so I got mad at her. I demanded that she replace the stolen laptop. But she insisted she never left. But I know I locked the door behind me. Are you saying the door magically unlocked itself? The person definitely didn't break in. They walked in. Yes, she said, collapsing onto the couch and shaking her head. You don't understand. It's not me. It's this curse. I blinked at her. What? Lena looked up, her face pale, her eyes hollow. There's a curse on my family. It's been passed down through generations. My grandmother had it, my mother had it, and now it's mine. Everything I touch falls apart. People around me get hurt. Her voice cracked. I should have told you before you moved in, but I thought maybe it would be different this time. I didn't know what to say. A curse? Really? I wanted to laugh it off, but the look in her eyes stopped me. I don't believe in curses, I muttered. But even as I said it, a knot formed in my stomach. Lena just stared at me. You will. For a few days, nothing happened. I convinced myself Lena's curse talk was just her way of dealing with her bad luck, some sort of coping mechanism. But then, things started happening to me. It started small. My car, which had been perfectly fine, broke down 3 times in 1 week. A light bulb exploded right as I turned it on, glass raining down on my hand, leaving tiny cuts. One morning, as I stepped out of the shower, the towel rack broke off the wall and it hit me on the head, leaving a bruise. I tried to brush it off, but the unease gnawed at me. Whenever something went wrong, I couldn't help but think of Lena's words. People around me get hurt. And then, one night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was Lena, but the whispers were too soft, too far away. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I lay still, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make out the words, but they were just out of reach, like a language that I couldn't understand. I turned on the bedside lamp, but as soon as I did, it flickered and went out, plunging the room back into darkness. And that's when I saw it. A shadow hovering in the corner of the room, darker than the night itself. It shifted, almost like it was watching me. I scrambled out of bed, backing toward the door, my breath coming in short gasps. The shadow moved closer. I bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. Lena was pacing the living room, her face pale and drawn. You saw it, didn't you? She whispered, not looking at me. Saw what? The shadow. It's the curse. It's getting stronger. I swallowed hard. This is insane. You need help, Lena. We both do. She shook her head. There's no help. Once it starts, it doesn't stop. I tried leaving. I tried running, but it always finds me. It'll find you, too. I wanted to scream at her, to demand she tell me what the hell was going on. But I knew deep down she was right. The bad luck, the accidents, the whispers, it was spreading. I didn't know how to stop it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, clutching my phone, thinking about calling someone, anyone. But who would believe me? The next day, I packed my bags. I told Lena I was moving out. She didn't argue. She gave me a sad, knowing look, like she'd seen this all before. But as I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm. It won't stop, she whispered. Even if you leave, it'll follow you. I yanked my arm away and ran out the door. I thought getting out of 4B would free me, but as I walked down the street, I felt something. A cold presence behind me, following me. I looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Yet the air felt heavier, the shadows darker. I don't know how long I have before it catches up to me, before Lena's curse becomes mine, but I can feel it creeping closer with every step, every breath. I thought I could outrun it, but now I'm not so sure. I think it's already too late. I didn't think much of it the first time. Cats do weird things. It's kind of their charm. But when Toby, my cat, started staring at nothing, something in my gut twisted. It wasn't your normal cat curiosity. He wasn't just zoning out. He was locked onto something. At first, I laughed it off, calling him Spooky Toby whenever he froze in place, eyes wide and unblinking. But then he started meowing. Not the cute little feed me meows either, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. Deep, almost guttural sounds that didn't fit his small body. It was like he was trying to tell me something urgent. At first, I'd get up and feed him, assuming he was hungry. He wasn't. The food stayed untouched and he just kept meowing, staring off into whatever invisible world he seemed to be in. I tried to ignore it, but it got worse. I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was watching me. Toby would be perched on the foot of my bed, eyes fixed on a spot right next to me. Not at me, but just past me, like there was someone standing there. "Toby, you okay?" I'd whisper, more to calm myself than him. But he wouldn't respond. He'd just sit there, eerily still. It was around then that the nightmares started. I've never been one to remember my dreams, but these were vivid, too real. I'd be walking through my apartment, only everything was wrong. The furniture was where it should be, but the air felt thick, like something terrible had happened. And in every corner, in every shadow, I could feel a presence watching me. The worst part? Toby was never in the dreams. It was just me, completely alone. I shrugged it off at first, chalking it up to stress. Work had been a nightmare in itself. Deadlines piling up, expectations sky high. I barely had time to breathe, let alone sleep. But then came the night Toby growled. I didn't even know cats could growl. I was sitting on the couch trying to unwind with a beer when I heard it. A low, throaty rumble from behind me. I turned, and there he was, crouched low to the ground, ears flat, eyes wide with terror. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, his eyes fixed on the dark hallway that led to my bedroom. I froze, every hair on the back of my neck standing on end. It was just my hallway. I'd walked through it 1,000 times. But in that moment, it felt wrong. Too dark. Too still. "Toby, what the hell?" I muttered, trying to break the tension. But he didn't move, didn't blink. He just kept growling. My heart pounded as I stood up, slowly making my way toward the hallway. The apartment was dead silent, save for Toby's growling. I flicked on the light. Nothing. Just the same empty space. But it didn't feel empty. Toby darted under the bed, his growling turning into a terrified yowl. I dropped to my knees, peering under the bed, trying to coax him out. "Come on, buddy, it's just me." But he wouldn't come out. That's when I started to lose it. I didn't realize it at first, but little by little, the weight of it all started crushing me. The sleepless nights, the constant feeling of being watched, Toby's never-ending meowing, it was eating away at me. I became obsessed, locking myself in my apartment, barely leaving except to grab essentials. I started snapping at people, my friends, co-workers, even strangers. The world outside felt irrelevant compared to what was happening inside. I began researching. Ghosts, spirits, demons, anything that could explain what was going on. I even bought sage, thinking maybe the apartment needed to be cleansed. It didn't work. If anything, it made things worse. Toby's behavior escalated. He stopped sleeping. He'd pace around the apartment all night, his eyes darting around as if something was following him. And then the growling started again. Only this time it wasn't just at night. He'd sit by the door, his body tensed, staring at it like something was trying to get in. Or maybe something was already inside. It was driving me insane. My apartment, once my sanctuary, had become a prison. I could feel my mind slipping. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't enjoy anything. The constant dread hung over me like a suffocating fog. Even my thoughts became darker, more irrational. I found myself angry all the time, snapping at people for no reason, isolating myself even more. The worst part? I started resenting Toby. It wasn't his fault, but I couldn't help it. He had become a constant reminder of the nightmare my life had turned into. One night, I hit my breaking point. I had barely slept in days, and the silence of the apartment felt deafening. I poured myself a drink, hoping it would calm my nerves, but it didn't. Toby was pacing again, his soft meows grating against my already frayed sanity. "Enough!" I shouted, slamming the glass down on the table. Toby froze, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I regretted it instantly, but I couldn't take it back. I was unraveling. That night, I didn't dream. I woke up to the sound of Toby's growling, louder than ever before. I bolted upright in my bed, my heart racing. He was standing at the foot of my bed, but this time his eyes were locked onto me. Or rather, onto something right next to me. I turned slowly, my skin crawling with dread. There was nothing there, but I felt it. Cold, heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. And then, in the silence, I heard a whisper. Soft, barely audible, but enough to send my heart pounding in my chest. I jumped out of bed, grabbing Toby and running for the living room. I couldn't stay there, not another second. I crashed on the couch, holding Toby tight as he trembled in my arms. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called a friend. I hadn't told anyone what was going on, but I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. When I finally spilled everything, she listened patiently before suggesting something that I hadn't thought of. Maybe it's not the apartment. Maybe it's you. The thought hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so focused on the external, the shadows, the cold air, the feeling of being watched. But what if the darkness was inside me? My mental state had been deteriorating for months. Stress, anger, isolation. Maybe Toby wasn't seeing ghosts. Maybe he was sensing my unraveling. I took her advice and sought help, starting therapy. Slowly, things began to change. The nightmares faded. The feeling of being watched disappeared. And Toby? He stopped staring at nothing. The growling ceased. He went back to being the playful, mischievous cat I had first brought home. The clock on my dashboard blinked 11:37 p.m. The only light guiding my way was the narrow beam from my headlights, slicing through the darkness like a knife through velvet. The road was deserted, stretching out like a black ribbon under the sliver of a moon that seemed to be hiding behind the trees, almost as if it didn't want to witness what lay ahead. I hadn't passed another vehicle in half an hour, and the thought of the next town being almost 30 miles away weighed heavily on my mind. It had been a long day. A meeting in the city, followed by hours of driving through the back roads. I was drained, but the emptiness of the road had become unnervingly monotonous, keeping me on edge. Just when I began to contemplate whether stopping for the night might be a safer bet, I saw her. She was standing by the side of the road, a faint outline barely visible in the darkness, long before my headlights reached her. It was strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen her before, even though that seemed impossible. As I got closer, I could make out that she was wearing what looked like a sari, its fabric fluttering in the slight breeze. The image was strikingly out of place in the middle of nowhere. I instinctively slowed down, something deep inside me urging me to stop, even though I usually ignored hitchhikers. My rational mind screamed at me to keep driving, to ignore this bizarre sight and push on. But the sense of isolation, the sheer loneliness of the road made me hesitate. What if she needed help? What if something had happened to her? I pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. She turned to face the car, and as my headlights fully illuminated her, I felt my breath catch in my throat. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, with deep, dark eyes that seemed to bore into me. She looked young, no older than her mid-20s, but there was something timeless about her, something ancient that I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I rolled down the window. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she stared at me, her eyes reflecting the faint light from the dashboard. Then, without a word, she walked around the car and opened the passenger door. The scent of jasmine filled the air as she slid into the seat beside me, her movements graceful, yet oddly mechanical. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to break the silence that suddenly felt oppressive.
"Just drive,"
she whispered, her voice soft, almost melodic. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed the feeling aside. There was something compelling about her presence, something that drew me in despite the unease gnawing at my gut. I did as she asked, pulling back onto the road, the hum of the engine filling the space between us. The night seemed to grow darker, the trees on either side of the road closing in, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to us. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening, but every time I tried to focus on a logical explanation, I'd found myself glancing at her instead. She was staring straight ahead, her hands resting in her lap, the sari's fabric shimmering in the dim light. I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she was, in a haunting sort of way. There was an air of sadness about her, a melancholy that seemed to seep into the air around us. I wanted to ask her more, to understand what had brought her to this desolate road in the dead of night, but something held me back. It was as if I knew that asking would open a door that could never be closed. I drove in silence for what felt like an eternity, the tension between us growing thicker with every mile. The road ahead was still empty, no sign of civilization in sight. I stole another glance at her, noticing the way the moonlight caught in her dark hair, how her skin seemed to almost glow in the darkness. That's when I noticed something strange. Her reflection in the rearview mirror, or rather, the lack of it. The passenger seat was empty in the mirror, as if she wasn't really there. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My heart began to race, pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cutting through the panic rising in my chest. I couldn't answer. My mouth had gone dry, and my mind was spinning with a mix of fear and disbelief. I wanted to slam on the brakes, to throw her out of the car and get the hell out of there, but I was paralyzed. Something was holding me in place, some invisible force that kept me from reacting the way I knew I should. She turned to look at me, and for the first time her expression changed. There was a hint of a smile on her lips, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're wondering why you can't see me in the mirror, aren't you?" she asked, her tone almost playful. I nodded, the fear choking me, making it impossible to speak. "You're not the first one to pick me up, you know," she continued, her voice now laced with a chilling calmness. "And you won't be the last." Suddenly, it all made sense. The familiarity, the sense of déjà vu that had nagged at me the moment I saw her. I had heard stories, urban legends about a ghostly figure who haunted these back roads, luring unsuspecting drivers to their doom. But those were just stories. Tales told to scare kids around campfires. They couldn't be real, could they? My pulse quickened as my eyes darted back to the road, desperately seeking any sign of escape, but the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. There was no turning back. The realization hit me like a cold wave. I was trapped, just like the others before me. She leaned closer, her breath cold against my skin, sending shivers down my spine.
"Do you know what happens to those who pick me up?"
she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring in my ears. I didn't answer, but the terror in my eyes must have given me away.
"They never make it to the next town," she said, almost sadly. "They become a part of the road, just like me."
In that moment I saw it. Flashes of my own future. A twisted vision of endless driving on an endless road, never reaching my destination, never escaping the nightmare. I was doomed to relive this night over and over, just as she had. And then, without warning, she was gone. The seat beside me was empty, the scent of jasmine lingering in the air. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt in the middle of the road. I sat there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. My mind raced, my body trembling uncontrollably. It took all my strength to turn the key, shutting off the engine, plunging the car into silence. The darkness outside was impenetrable. The road ahead, nothing but a void. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed by fear, but eventually I forced myself to start the car again. I needed to get out of there, to put as much distance between me and that cursed road as possible. I drove without looking back, my eyes glued to the road ahead, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what I had just escaped. But as the lights of the next town finally came into view, a new fear gripped me. What if she wasn't the only one? As I pulled into the gas station on the edge of town, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. For a moment, just a fleeting second, I thought I saw her standing in the distance, her eyes locked onto mine, her smile chillingly familiar. I blinked, and she was gone. But the scent of jasmine lingered in the air, a reminder that no matter how far I drove, I would never truly escape.